Ibrahim Traoré wrote a letter to Pope Leo XIV. Here, the Pope replies to Ibrahim Traoré. His letter will make you cry. Please watch to the end and drop your comment in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video. A new world is here.
Excellency President Ibrahim Traoré, President of the sovereign nation of Burkina Faso, son of the African soil, defender of his people. May grace and peace be multiplied to you through wisdom, courage, and truth. I received your letter not as a political communique, nor as a demand echoing through diplomatic channels. I received it as the cry of the soul, powerful, principled, and painful, from a son of the continent that has known too much loss, too much silence, and too many broken promises. I have read your words, not once, but many times, and each reading pierced deeper than the last, for in your voice I heard not merely the anger of a president, but the righteous cry of a continent, long wounded by the dual blades of neglect and exploitation. Let me begin now with defense, but with confession. Yes, the Church has, at moments in history, stood beside colonizers, when it should have stood beside the crucified. Yeah, there were chapters, some long, some shamefully brief, where the mission of salvation became entangled in the machinery of subjugation, where the banner of the cross was hoisted beside flags of empire, and the teachings of Christ were diluted by the ambitions of kings. For these sins, in commission, I bow my head in repentance. No institution, however sacred, is above self-examination, and if the Church is to remain a beacon, it must not only shine light outward, it must shine it within. You ask, will this papacy be different? And to that I reply, not only will it be different, it must be. For too long, the African voice has been heard only in whispers. Your leaders have been praised only when they were pliable, and demonized when they dared to defy unjust systems. Your resources have been extracted while your people were left to scavenge what was theirs to begin with. But Africa is not a charity case. Africa is not a patient waiting for the West to administer spiritual or political anesthesia. Africa is the cradle of courage, the wellspring of song, the pulse of prophecy. It is not the world's burden, it is its teacher. Let me speak plainly, as you did, President Trias, on colonial legacy. President Traoré, you spoke of chains not only of those that bound the bodies of our ancestors, but the invisible ones that still clutch at the soul of Africa. Let us speak truth, not as adversaries, but as men burdened with memory. Colonialism was not simply a political conquest, it was a spiritual betrayal. It was not just the theft of land, but the attempted erasure of identity. Entire civilizations with their poetry, their proverbs, their cosmologies, their sacred rhythms, were silenced under foreign flags and foreign gods. The missionaries, some sincere, came with crosses in one hand, but behind them followed gunboats, traders, and governors with contracts of domination, baptismal. Fonts were built next to whips. Scriptures were preached beside swords. The story of Christ who came to liberate was too often retold in the language of control, and though many of those missionaries gave their lives in service, and some stood up to the powers of empire, the broader truth remains: the Church did not always stand with the oppressed. Too often it stood with the conqueror. I confess this not as a political calculation, but as a moral reckoning. Because if the Church is to truly mirror Christ, then it must weep where Christ would weep. And surely he weeps for what was done in his name on African soil. I have seen the ruins of colonial prisons turned into schools. I have met grandmothers who remember their tribes being renamed. I have watched as young African seminarians ask, is this faith ours, or was it imported? Let me answer clearly, the gospel was never meant to conquer. It was meant to liberate. Christ was never a colonizer. He was a carpenter from Nazareth, brown-skinned, occupied, poor. And so I pledge that under this papacy, we will revisit our history not to dwell in guilt, but to root out denial, not to perform penance with words, but to open doors with justice. The church must become not a reminder of conquest, but a refuge for cultural rebirth. Let the next chapter be one written together by African hands in African languages and in full ownership of faith that was never truly foreign, but always somehow destined to rise again from African soil. On economic injustice, President Traore, when you speak of blood-stained minerals and hunger in the shadow of gold mines, you are not exaggerating. You are revealing a wound that the world has chosen to dress with silence. Africa is rich, yet too many of her children remain poor. Why so? Because the wealth beneath your soil, cobalt, gold, uranium, coltan, oil, has been turned into a curse, not a blessing. These were supposed to be gifts of providence, not instruments of plunder. But instead of building schools, they have built empires far from the shores of Africa. Let us no longer pretend that economic suffering is accidental. Let us no longer speak of underdevelopment as if it were nature's plan. It was policy, it was greed, it was engineered stagnation, orchestrated debt, and predatory agreements signed in glass towers, while farmers walked barefoot through dust. And yes, while the church itself may not have signed trade deals or drawn oil contracts, it has often been too quiet when it should have cried out, too cautious when it should have stood between the vulnerable and the vultures, too diplomatic when the gospel demanded disruption. There are African nations today where a child cannot drink clean water, but multinationals extract billions from the same land without paying fair dues. There are communities where women give birth in candlelight hospitals, while cargo ships full of precious resources sail out of port, guarded by foreign guns. That is not trade. That is tribute extracted from the wealthy. And this, dear brothers and sisters of the world, is not just an African tragedy. It is a global scandal. It is the failure of our collective morality. It is the blasphemy of preaching justice on Sunday while investing in systems of extraction on Monday. Tagore, you asked, will the Vatican name these sins? Yes, we will. We will no longer speak of poverty without naming its architects. We will challenge institutions that pretend benevolence while negotiating for control behind closed doors. We will no longer sit at global summits in silence when African leaders are told to privatize their future in exchange for short-term loans. The church must not merely advocate for aid, it must fight for equity. We must speak of economic repentance, for true peace cannot exist where there is structural theft, where prosperity for the few is built on the perpetual depletion of the many, where Africa must always borrow back its own wealth with interest. This papacy will seek partnerships with African economists, theologians, and reformers. We will ask not how we can help Africa, but how we can dismantle the systems that have hurt her for centuries. And let us be clear, Africa does not need saving. Africa needs space to breathe, to rise, to govern her destiny without manipulation masked as mentorship. Let this be the era when the church uses its global influence not to advise politely, but to advocate prophetically. Because economic justice is not a matter of numbers, it is a matter of soul. When a mother in Ouagadougou or Goma or Bamako weeps because her educated son cannot find dignified work, or when she buries that son because he drowned trying to flee to a distant shore, we must ask, what gospel are we preaching if it does not confront the system that made that death inevitable? We must ask ourselves, what is the value of prayer if it does not drive us toward justice? And so I say to you, President Traore, and to all of Africa, the church cannot be neutral in the face of economic oppression. Christ overturned the tables once. Now we must ask whose tables must be turned today. On political interference and sovereignty, President Traore, when you speak of sovereignty, your voice carries the weight of centuries, during which the African will has been contested, corralled and conditioned by powers that did not emerge from the soil of Africa, but planted themselves there like towering foreign trees, casting long shadows across native lands. The struggle for African self-determination is not a new cry. It is the old song of resistance that began when the first maps were drawn without your consent, when borders were carved by the hands of colonial ambition, and when leaders chosen not by your people but by distant interests were placed like marionettes in high office. And yet, even as flags changed and independence was declared, interference did not end. It merely changed form. Today it comes in the language of strategic partnerships, in the packaging of humanitarian aid, in the presence of military bases that were never democratically invited. We call them allies, and some may well be. But we must also ask, why does Africa remain a battlefield for the interests of others? Why must your internal affairs be negotiated in foreign capitals before they're respected at home? Why are African elections monitored with suspicion while fraudulent dealings elsewhere are called irregularities? Why is it, President Traore, that when an African leader speaks of nationalizing resources, he is accused of authoritarianism, but when a foreign CEO exploits those same resources, he is praised as an innovator? We have built a global order where some nations act with impunity while others must beg for legitimacy. That is not peace. That is power imbalance masquerading as diplomacy, as a church rooted in the message of Christ, who was born under occupation and crucified by an empire. We cannot ignore this. Christ stood with the occupied, not the occupiers. He wept for Jerusalem not because it was wealthy, but because it was wounded by foreign interference and internal betrayal. And so today we must weep for Kinshasa, for Bamako, for Ouagadougou, cities whose destinies are often debated in rooms where their sons and daughters have no seat. Your Holiness, you asked, will the Church defend African sovereignty? Let me be clear. Sovereignty is not a luxury, it is a right. It is not a privilege to be granted by stronger nations. It is a divine dignity rooted in creation itself. Every people has the right to shape their own future. Nation has the right to protect its identity, its culture, its path forward, and the Church as a moral compass for the global community must not merely affirm this right in writing, we must defend it in action. We must reject policies and treaties that bind nations in economic shackles while pretending to offer freedom. We must expose covert operations, manipulation of local politics, the orchestration of coups disguised as democratic transitions. You mentioned the drones over your skies, Captain Trail, machines that hum with foreign code and foreign command. You mentioned the whispers in your capital, the silent hand that tries to tip the scales of justice and governance. These are not the marks of a free world. These are the remnants of imperial logic, the same logic that says Africa is a project to be managed, not a continent to be respected. But Africa is rising, and with her rise comes the discomfort of those who once dictated her fate. That discomfort is necessary. It is the pain of awakening. To my fellow leaders of faith across the world, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, and beyond, I say, if you do not stand for sovereignty, we stand for subjugation by default. To the diplomats and financiers who design Africa's future from boardrooms, if your strategy begins without consultation with the people who live the consequences, then it is not partnership, it is paternalism to the leaders of the West and East. If your presence in Africa is more visible in your embassies and airstrips than in the lives of the people, then your mission is misaligned. And to the African people, you are not pawns in a geopolitical chess game. You are heirs of civilizations older than most flags. Your voice matters not because the world permits it, but because God bestowed it. The Church will walk with you as you reclaim your voice We will support transparency and truth. We will not support covert manipulation. We will stand against puppet regimes and bless only those governments that derive their authority from the consent of their people, not the pressure of external powers. Africa deserves sovereignty not in symbolism but in substance. Let us work for a world where Africa's leaders are chosen by the ballot, not by foreign banks, where decisions are made in Dakar and Nairobi, not whispered, in Paris, Washington, or Moscow. Because in the eyes of God, there is no second-class continent, and in the heart of the church, there should be no second-hand freedom. On migration and the crisis of dignity, President Traore, your words echo the silent footsteps of millions who have left African soil, not for riches, not for glory, but for the mere right to survive. The world sees the migrant boats capsizing in the Mediterranean and measures tragedy in statistics. But we, as shepherds of souls, must see what lies beneath those numbers. A mother clutching her child as saltwater burns their skin. A young man whispering a prayer as he steps into a vessel made for fishing, not for fate. A grandmother in a distant village lighting a candle, unaware that her granddaughter's last breath was taken between waves and wire. Africa is bleeding not just through war or exploitation, but through migration born of despair. And the shame is not Africa's. The shame belongs to the system that allowed such despair to become normal. It is the shame of a world that extracted Africa's resources, then built walls against the people who mine the cobalt, harvested the cocoa, or drilled the oil. It is the shame of nations that drain Africa's youth through unfair trade, destabilize her governments through covert operations, then wonder why her children seek refuge elsewhere. What hypocrisy is this to bar the door to those whose suffering was, in part, manufactured by the very guests now seated in halls of power? President Traore, I have seen the camps, I have wept in Lampedusa, I have prayed in silence at Lesbos, I have looked into the eyes of children who have no more tears left to cry, and I have asked myself what kind of world allows this? What kind of church dares to stay neutral? We must call this crisis by its true name, a moral failure. And I say to the powerful nations of the world, if your wealth was built on Africa's back, then your borders cannot be closed to her pain. Migration is not a crime. Let me repeat this as loudly as truth allows. Migration is not a crime. The criminal is not the refugee. The criminal is the warlord, armed with weapons from Western factories. The criminal is the profiteer who manipulates currency markets until food becomes unaffordable. The criminal is the foreign consultant who designs development plans that never develop the people. Yes, borders must be respected. Yes, nations have the right to regulate who enters and exits. But the first border we must protect is the dignity of the human person. Crossing the desert because staying home means starvation, it is not freedom of movement. It is forced displacement. When a woman flees with her baby, strapped to her chest to avoid military raids funded by invisible hands, it is not migration, it is survival. Africa's children do not migrate out of laziness. They migrate because hope has been outsourced. To the leaders of Europe, open your eyes, not just your gates. Understand why they come. Look not only to their passports, but to your past. Ask not what they threaten, but what they reveal. To the leaders of Africa, we must create nations worth staying in. Nations where brilliance is not exported, but embraced. Where our schools don't train the youth to leave, but to lead. To the global church, we must protect migrants, not as a political talking point, but as sacred lives. We must build sanctuaries, advocate for fair asylum laws, and remind the world that the Holy Family themselves fled as refugees into Egypt. Let us not forget Jesus was once a migrant child. And to the migrants themselves, those on foot, on boat, in detention centers, in shelters, in fear, you are not forgotten, you are not invisible, you are not illegal in the eyes of God, You are the living sermon of this age, a sermon that confronts the comfort of the powerful, a sermon that calls us back to conscience, a sermon that tells us that if global justice had hands, they would be building bridges, not borders. President Traore, if your letter is a trumpet of resistance, let this reply be the hymn of remembrance. We cannot talk of peace while ignoring the exodus of an entire generation. We cannot speak of hope while silencing the stories of the displaced. Africa's youth deserve better than tombstones in foreign lands and unmarked graves beneath desert sands. They deserve futures, not funerals. And so long as I have breath, I will preach this truth, that no human being is illegal, that no continent owns compassion, that until migration is a choice and not a last resort, our work as shepherds is not done on cultural respect and the theft of memory. President Traore, in your words, I hear the voice of a continent not merely robbed of wealth, but robbed of memory. The theft of Africa is not only found in her gold, her diamonds, her oil. It is not only measured in ships laden with human cargo or in modern contracts. Masters aid know the deepest wound is more intimate. It is the wound of erasure of narratives rewritten, of cultures humiliated, of sacred traditions silenced. This too is colonization not of land but of the soul. What do we say to the child in Ouagadougou who learns that the museums of Europe house more artifacts of their ancestors than the soil on which they walk? What do we say to the elder in Timbuktu whose great-great-grandfather's manuscripts were taken for preservation yet never returned? What do we say to the griots whose oral history was labeled primitive, while conquerors wrote their own sins into scripture? We call it preservation, we call it exchange, but let us speak plainly. It was a looting of memory, and memory, President Traore, is sacred. Without memory, a people cannot heal. Without memory, a people cannot rise. Without memory, a people cannot know who they truly are. And that is precisely what made the theft so devastating. I have walked the Vatican's archives and marveled at their beauty, their scope, their depth. Yet I have also wept at what is missing from the shelves of African children. How can the future be formed if the past remains fragmented? How can a continent find dignity if our genius is displayed under foreign flags, behind security glass, beside plaques that reduce kingdoms to tribes and freedom fighters to rebels? You see, the problem is not simply that Africa's cultural treasures reside in foreign capitals. The deeper tragedy is that in many of those places, their presence is still justified by arrogance. They say we protect what Africa cannot. They say we curate what Africa neglects. But how do you protect what you first stole? How do you claim to preserve what you never asked permission to take? And so I say now, in this sacred moment of renewed dialogue between the Church and Africa, it is time. It is time to return what was taken, not as an act of charity, but of justice, not as a symbol of goodwill, but as an admission of wrong, not to complete history, but to begin its healing. Culture is not a souvenir, it is a seed, and Africa's children deserve to plant it back into the soil of their own nations. Let us return the masks, the bronzes, the manuscripts, not only into hands, but into hearts. Let us restore the languages that were once forbidden. Let us honor the rhythms once mocked, the faiths once dismissed, the stories once burned. Let us end the centuries-long assumption that the West interprets and Africa imitates for Forio. The soul of humanity is too rich, too diverse, too interconnected to be monopolized. President Traore, I hear your plea. I receive your challenge. I feel the pain you carry, not only as a head of state, but as an artisan of the soil. Africa does not need permission to be proud. Her wisdom predates cathedrals. Her philosophies shaped civilizations. Her spiritual heritage, even when not written in Latin, bears the fingerprints of God. And I must say to the world, African identity is not a relic. It is not a museum piece. It is not a romanticized past or a charity case for UNESCO. It is a living, breathing testament to resilience, to creativity, to sacred memory, to the youth of Africa. Reclaim your stories. To the custodians of global heritage, unboard the glass cases. To the institutions that have built prestige on plunder, rebuild your honor through restitution. And to the church, the universal church, let us finally acknowledge that missionary work must never mean cultural amnesia.